Hey everybody, today I'm taking a look at Yokohama, which is a 2 to 4 player board game designed by Hisashi Hayashi. This one takes around 90 minutes to play. I would call this a medium weight Euro strategy game that looks like this when it's on the table. So this is quite a sprawling table hog style of game. We have multiple different boards here, such as these area majority style boards. You've got this board here where you can draft technology from. You've got contract boards down here where you can take new objectives to try and fulfill. You've got the big scoreboard here and these public objectives that you can work towards. And you also have the main part of the game made up of these action boards, which are going to vary from time to time because you can see they are all modular. So the layout is going to change. And this is going to be how you're going to gather resources and trade resources in to get different rewards. Each player is also going to have their own personal player board, which is kind of their warehouse where they can store all their different upgrades and things that they can purchase throughout the game to increase their influence on the main action boards. There's also a couple of decks of cards here for these technologies and contracts, and a bunch of different resources such as these fish, the rope, the metal, the coins, and much more. So let's talk about how you win a game of Yokohama. So as you'd probably expect with most Euro games, you're trying to get as many victory points as you can in this game, and the end game is going to be triggered through a number of different means. The first of which is a number of spots being taken up on the church management board, one of which is the same but on the customs management board. If there's not enough cards to replenish the order board here, or until a player has placed all of their shops or trade houses onto the board. So how does Yokohama work? So you can actually see on your individual player boards here how the game is broken down into 3 phases, 2 of which are exactly the same, and you've got the main action phase in between that. So the additional action phases let you do little things such as complete contracts that you've completed, like this one here, which means if I had 4 fish and a metal, I could trade those in to get 8 points. You could also try claim these public objectives, the sooner the better, because you're going to get more points, such as having a certain number of resources or technology, or even getting onto certain, or presence on these certain boards here, like with these hammers on, like the silk mill here. But the main action phase is where most of the gameplay is going to take place. And the first thing you're going to do in that main action phase is the placement phase. And that is where you're going to take a number of cubes from your personal supply, bearing in mind that you cannot have access to your warehouse until you actually spend time or money to unlock them. So you're going to either take 2 or 3 of these cubes, and then you're going to scatter them out on the board as you want, with the idea of which actions you want to actually take. So let's just say one option would be to place 3 cubes on the board, like so, in different regions. Or if I wanted to, let's say I didn't make that move, I could place 2 cubes onto a single location. Let's just say I did this, like so. Now, if I ever put one of these cubes on a location where an opponent's pawn is, like this, then I have to spend 1 yen in order to do so. So it's going to be quite costly if I want to put those cubes on a spot with other players on. Now the second thing you do is the movement phase, which is where you move to which action you want to take. But you can only ever move through regions where you have presence on, i.e. these cubes. So I can go as far as I want to any region that doesn't have, that I have a cube on. So let's just say I go to this fishing ground here. Now once I've done that, I'm going to take the action on that board, depending on the strength that I have there. So each of my player pieces is going to count towards 1 strength. So 1 each for each of these cubes, and then I've got my pawn itself, which is going to be another strength. Now you can also potentially get further strength by placing these houses or those big trade shops on there as well, to get further presence on that board. But let's say I took the 3 here. I'm going to have a look at the strength 3, so this one here. I'm going to get 3 fish into my personal supply. Now if I ever get up to 4 or 5, I'm going to have the option to construct a building, so either these shops or the trade houses like such, and I'm going to put them onto one of these available spots here. Bearing in mind this spot can only ever store these trade houses. So let's just say I took this one here and I wanted to cover up this spot here. I'll take the reward beneath it, i.e. 2 of those leaves, into my personal supply, and I can only ever do that once per location. So now I've got a shop on this location, I cannot build another one. But it does mean that in the future I'm always going to have at least 1 presence there in terms of the strength value. Now if I ever got to strength 5 and I'm the first player to do that, I can take this token as well, which will give me a little one-off bonus, such as getting bonus resources and things. And once you've resolved the action, potentially built on there, you're going to take those cubes back into your personal supply and start again from scratch, basically, starting off from where you've just left. So let's take a look at what all the different boards do. So we've already spoken about the fish one. The copper one works pretty much the same way, except you need to have at least strength 3 before you start gaining the metal. So the metal is quite a rare resource to get hold of. You've got the silk mill here, which works just the same, but with the rope, also with the silk resource. You've got the laboratory, which lets you take these technology cards. So depending on the strength there, you're going to get a certain amount of points to spend on technology cards. And you can boost that by spending additional resources, which will let you go to this board here, again, spending the cost and potentially giving you ongoing bonuses, such as like this mining technology here, which will say whenever I gain a copper, I can gain an extra one. Or once per turn, I can trade in a silk for 2 coins. Or like the stock market here, where if I ever have less than 2 yen in my hand, I can increase it to 2 yen. So these are all quite nice bonuses to have. Additionally, all these cards have a different nation tied to them like this, where if you ever have a pair, you can end up getting more kind of end-game victory points. The port down here means that you can take new contracts to work towards. So again, if you need to have at least a strength 2 to start taking them, but once you do, you can start taking them from this board here, starting from the low, the medium, or even the high contracts. And then you're going to start trying to work towards those, again, by trading in those resources, getting victory points, and potentially getting these imports as well, which correlates to another board here. This customs board where you can trade in a number of those import crates, and depending on how many you do, you're going to put one of your influence markers on the customs management board up here, getting the reward, i.e. points or other different bonuses, and also the most coverage at the end of the game is going to get further victory points based on majorities. And we've got the employment agency here, which lets you take things off your warehouse. So again, let's say I had a strength 3 on there, I could take 2 things from my warehouse and put it into my personal supply. So maybe I'd spend 2 money to get a new house or a new shop, or I could spend 4 and get one of these trade houses down, or even take a number of my cubes just to give me more flexibility, and that is free to do so. You've got the tea plantation, which is simply take that tea resource. You've got the bank, which lets you take money. And finally, you've got the church, which lets you get these faith points equal to how many strength you've got, plus trading other resources to boost that in order to try and claim one of these spots here. By, let's say I raised 6 faith points, I can put my cube on there, which will get me the bonus and additional points, and again, further area majority bonuses at the end of the game. And that is essentially how the game plays out. You're going to keep gathering resources, buying technologies, fulfilling contracts, placing down shops and trade houses on these spots here to get points, and of course working towards the public objectives, the faith points here, and of course the trade goods as well. And again, at the end of the game, once it's triggered, you're going to calculate all your points, and the player with the most victory points is going to be the winner. Okay, so let's start off from a mechanical standpoint. So very often you'll hear this game compared to another game called Istanbul. In fact, it's very hard to discuss one game without mentioning the other. And you know what, after playing Yokohama, I can clearly see why that comparison is made. I think it's a very just comparison, and there's a lot of similarities between the two. So this one, much like Istanbul, you are route building and then trying to kind of move your main piece around, I suppose, in order to get these resources, trade them in for victory points and things. And it's almost like this race as well to claim the best spots, to get your shops down, and also, of course, to get your warehouses down, because there's only one opportunity to get that big, chunky amount of points. But at the same time, you almost want to do everything at once because, yes, you want to get onto that faith track. Yeah, you want to get the imports down because you've got the best returns. You want to get your power influence down quicker because then you can get the best spots here and stuff, and you can mean that you've got a bit of a presence there even though you're not relying on the cubes themselves. So I do really like the way that works. You're constantly manipulating things around the board, creating new pathways and things, determining which route you're going to go next, and I like the way that works. So again, very smooth approach there, and from a somewhat formulaic system, they actually do resolve pretty quickly, because before you even if you don't reach 4 or 5 construction points, then you can pretty much disregard half of these anyway. So you're just going to move there, take the action, which is very snappy, and then take all your cubes off and pretty much start again. So it does have a nice dynamic flow to things, and you do have to bear in mind where your opponent is on the different tiles as well, because you might have to kind of create a route around them, because you don't want to be giving up that extra coin or two, and when you can avoid doing so. I do really enjoy this efficiency puzzle of how to use and manage these cubes, because you do have quite a limited capacity of them. Yes, you can unlock more, which is another really interesting part of the game. But that idea of building up these routes and leaving things just stagnant there so that when the time comes, you can go back there and you can plan accordingly, bearing in mind that your opponent might be in the way and you might have to kind of zigzag when you need to, again, to stop you spending that extra coin or two. And of course, you can't even share a spot with your president anyway. So again, people are going to be somewhat in your way, whether they mean to or not. So I do like the way that you can prioritize things and map things out and plan ahead of time. And I do tend to enjoy games that where you have at least the option to do that. And Yokohama certainly does. You can very carefully think that I'm going to go here and get this resource, and by then I'll get my maybe my contract cashed in, and that'll get me import good. I've already got some cubes ready on the import stand, and then I can get down there, and I've already got some cubes there, and if you've got building there, so get a stronger action as well to get the better spots. So again, you've got that constant synergy of the way all these boards work together and the different routes you're going to build and plan. So yeah, it has a nice thread of strategy there, as well as the tactical kind of scope in order to move things as people get in your way. Another part of the game I really enjoyed was the technology cards. I really enjoy it when games manage and utilise kind of upgrade cards and special powers to their maximum benefit without feeling broken. And this game manages to do that. All the different powers are interesting. There's a whole stack of them and they're all worth having. So I like the way that works. And again, it feels like, if somebody has a card that you really want, you're like, oh, I wish I had that card. I wish I got there sooner. But again, if you're focusing on doing that, then you're probably neglecting something else. So it does have that constant tension of wanting to do everything at once, which those games tend to keep me excited and to keep me engaged. The resource management itself is also a strong part of the game because it's nice that when you can go to a region and you've already had invested in it somewhat already, then you can get a whole chunk of resources at once, and it doesn't feel like you need to keep kind of monotonously going back to the same spot to kind of top up on your tea, for example. If you have a strength 5 there, you're going to get a massive 5 strength all at once. And something I didn't mention as well is that when you do build these trade houses on these spots and another player goes there and uses that building, then you actually get a coin from the bank. So you've got that kind of steady income and that gentle engine of making sure you've got enough money in your kitty to keep you going forward in the game. I did mention at the start of the video that the game takes around 90 minutes to play on average, and I would say that's probably right for your first game or two, but I do think that if you've got a bunch of players who are very familiar with this game, it actually does work at an incredibly quick pace, and you can probably get it done in 60 to 75 minutes at that 2 or 3 player count if you really want to. So it's definitely one that doesn't push the wrong side of 90 minutes. It definitely stays nice and tight within that 90-minute time frame, which again is normally the sweet spot for me. I mean, additionally, the turns are quick, so there's not too much scope for analysis paralysis. You're pretty much just going spot to spot, getting a whole bunch of resources, and you know what you're going to work towards. So it's not incredibly brain burnery, but it still does have enough to think about to keep it interesting. The replayability for Yokohama is also strong because all these different cards that go on these action boards are modular, so the incentives and the bonuses are going to change from game to game. There's also a ton of these technology cards, so they do feel different as well. And of course, you're going to see different contracts and things pop up, but I suppose they're not going to change the feel of the game tremendously. Now, I did mention that all these boards are modular, and yes, that is the case. And that is going to slightly kind of change the routes and things you build. But something I would say this game does lack in comparison to something like Istanbul is how different the game feels from game to game, depending on the layout of the board. Like for Istanbul, I think that you can get drastically different feeling games depending on that layout, where certain buildings are close to others. This one, I don't feel like it affects the game massively, if I'm honest. Now, I do think the game scales quite well too, because the more players means you're going to have more action boards to play with, and sometimes they're duplicates and things, whereas the fewer players, it's going to get tighter and tighter, meaning that you still have a layer of interaction where you're going to stand on each other's toes and things. And of course, different action boards and things are used where certain spots are blocked off depending on the player count to keep things nice and tight. The version of the game you see here is just the standard retail version of the game. I know there was a deluxe version which I've not personally seen or played with, so I can only talk about the components in relation to this one. I think all the components are generally fine. The action boards are really good quality. Iconography is generally very good. I didn't really have to refer to the rulebook at all. Even all the technology cards are very clearly kind of written out what they do and how they work. So again, no confusion there with how they work. And I think once you've got the rules in your head in this game, there's not really much scope to losing those rules because there's no fiddliness, there's not really much exceptions and things. I suppose my only disappointment with this version is the actual buildings themselves. Like, you've got the shops and the trade houses here. They are just really thin bits of cardboard and they're small. And I don't think they have much of a presence when they actually claimed on these certain action boards. So it feels like they could have been better and maybe even like 3D pieces, little wooden pieces or something, but that's probably why they wanted you to go for the deluxe version. But despite that, I think the game is well produced, and it's it looks good despite being such a table hog. So you probably will need a big table to play this one. Okay, so let's get into my final thoughts on Yokohama. So straight up, this game is excellent. It's so well designed. There's a lot to be enjoyed here if you like this style of game. Now, something that I can't ignore and I need to kind of stress is how close it is and how similar it is to Istanbul. So Istanbul has been one of my favourite games. It's had a very strong position in my top 50 for probably 4 or 5 years, if not longer. I adore that game. And this game, I think the base game to Istanbul and Yokohama are comparable. I think I like them equally, and I'd have a tough time choosing between the two. Now, if you started adding in expansion material to Istanbul, I think Istanbul slightly gets the edge on this one, and I'd probably choose to play that one 9 times out of 10 over Yokohama, which is kind of my passing judgment on this game. As I'm playing more and more games, I'm looking for more and more reasons not to keep them, because again, storage being a factor, and I can't keep every single game I play. So I think that's probably going to be the reason why I don't keep hold of Yokohama. Now, I also want to be fair and judge this game in its own right and its own merits, and I think the game is fantastic. Even if I played this game before Istanbul, I might even say, look, I'd keep this one over Istanbul because it's what I'm more familiar with. It's more kind of sentimental to me, and I have more of an attachment with it. But because I can't get that nagging feeling in my head that I'll probably always rather play Istanbul, it's going to be a reason why this one isn't going to stick around. But that being said, this is still a strong recommendation. It does everything exceptionally well. So much things that synergize with each other, and you want to get everything done. There's a real tension to get things done before the game ends, because it does end quite abruptly, and it's a nice rapid game. I love the warehouse mechanism here, where you have to bring things from your kind of storage into your personal supply, ready to spend it and use it. The actual investment in the boards is great as you get stronger and stronger actions as the game goes on, and building that thread of strategy to decide which board you're going to go to next and build those pathways and things. There's really nothing here I can complain about. Again, the only reason why it's not going to stick around is because I have a game that is so similar to it in my collection, and I like that game slightly more. But still, a fantastic game, one that definitely is well deserved of a shield of quality, and I can see why this one is so respected. And I think this one is just outside the BGG top 100 rankings, which goes to show that a lot of people like this game, and I think that is very just. So that is my final thoughts on Yokohama. Enjoyed it, really enjoyed it in fact, but sadly it's been trumped by Istanbul.